The Christian former governor of Jakarta, known as Ahok, has been released from prison where he served a 20-month sentence for blasphemy. Supporters gathered outside the jail in Jakarta to celebrate his release. But the popular former politician left quietly. He evaded the media and demonstrators. In 2016, Muslim hardliners campaigned for the former governor to be jailed for insulting their religion. Critics said the blasphemy law was being misused for political purposes. Well, let's get the latest on Ahok's release, and we're heading now to our Indonesia correspondent Ann Barker, who joins us to Jakarta. And what's been the reaction to Ahok's release?
Bev, most of the reaction was on the streets outside the jail or the police headquarters where Ahok was held for the last 20 months. There was a core group of his supporters who turned out. They were very jubilant. They were dressed in his signature flannel shirt to show their support for him. They actually defied a request from Ahok himself asking his supporters not to show up. Presumably one of the reasons for that was to head off any possibility of further protests, as we saw in the weeks and months before he was convicted. They were very violent protests. So most of the reaction has been quite subdued. Interestingly, there's been no real reaction as yet from the hardline Muslim groups who were behind those protests and ultimately the charges that were laid against him. Some of them have said that before today that he is a free man, he's served his time, and there's no indication that he's planning to go back into politics immediately, so there's no reason necessarily for them to react. But certainly it was a low-key release. The media didn't even film it, and most of his time later in the day was spent with his family. And what's been made of the timing of his release, given, of course, earlier in the week there were plans to release the Bali bombing mastermind, Bashir, but that has now, of course, been delayed. But is there the suggestion that they may have been timed for one to cancel out the other? Absolutely, that was the case. I mean, the timing of Ahok's release was always planned for now. He had a 2-year sentence from May 2017. And because of the system of remissions in Indonesia, where he would have gained a few weeks cut from his sentence here and there for national holidays, for good behaviour and so on, it just so happened that he was being released now. The timing is significant because there is an election in Indonesia coming up in 3 months. But also, as you say, there was a suggestion earlier this week that Abu Bakar Bashir, the extremist Islamic cleric, might have been released from jail on the same day, or at least the same week. Now, that was significant because the understanding among political watchers here was that that was a deliberate way for Joko Widodo, the Indonesian president, to head off any anger among the hardline Islamic groups at the release of Ahok, who is a Christian, he's an ethnic Chinese, he was the governor of Jakarta, and obviously we've seen such violence in the past. There was a possibility that this might engender more animosity, but also damage Joko Widodo's campaign in the lead up to that election in April. And you talked about the fact that there is no suggestion Ahok will try and resume his political career. Do we know that for certain? Look, we don't know that for certain. It hasn't been ruled in or ruled out. Certainly the PDIP party, the party of struggle, which is actually Joko Widodo's party, has some very strong supporters of Ahok in that party, and they would welcome him as a candidate even in the election in April. But the sensitivities surrounding his release and the sentiment from those hardline Islamic groups, those are the same groups now that are targeting Joko Widodo in his campaign. They accuse the president of not being Muslim enough, and that's one of the reasons why Joko Widodo a few months ago announced a conservative Muslim cleric as his running mate. So now it's significant too that we haven't had any immediate reaction from Joko Widodo about the release today of Ahok, who was a strong ally. They both had been allies when Joko Widodo first was the Jakarta governor, and then Ahok replaced him. So it's very telling that we haven't had any comment from the president. Clearly he wants to distance himself somewhat in the lead up to that election in April. Ann Barker in Jakarta, thanks so much for your time.